Right, continuing engaging conversation with my friend Kyle Rivelli. Kyle, you asked me to justify and infer what I mean by experience of God. The experience I would have relates to that which begs the very notion of justification and inference to begin with. These notions are simple. These things relate to experiences we all have, theist or non-theist, Christian or not. We experience things that are. We experience things that change. We experience things that move in line with ends that circumscribe everything we experience. So, moving along these lines, what I mean by God's energies being experienced in a basic sense, God's essence being beyond existence and indescribable, is really contained in the Eastern Christian philosophy centered around the distinction of God's essence and energies. And that would take a couple of more video responses to line up. But Kyle, you are known by your speaking, by your character, by your choices, by your shape and size. And all of these we can assess as something proceeding from your characterization as an individual rational animal. I can observe your particular rational animality, my rational animality, Lindsay Lohan's rational animality. But I observe these things by means of personal presence and action. So now by God, I would mean the uncreated essence, the essence that stands behind all actual material existence. Even this is not signifying what God is, but what God is not. Notice I said uncreated. God is not created. God is not a created thing. You're a created thing. I'm a created thing. The Tooth Fairy is a created thing. God is not a created thing. God is essentially uncreated and thus can't be personally observed unless he unifies with the created essence, which is why I believe in Christianity as the perfect union of the created with the uncreated is with Christ, whose nature or natures are fully God and fully man. The person of Christ, a person of God, is both fully God and fully man on this view, and that's how God connects to reality. Christianity is the only worldview that presents the uncreated in an intimate connection with the created. So nonetheless, these effects we can attribute to uncreatedness, the being, motion, and change in forms. Namely, these things are divorced from, but completely throughout the governance of everything that exists within contingent reality. And so here are these very basic notions that not only we can observe everywhere, but base the entire process of observation to begin with. But in essence, what these things are not of material things, as I explained in my last video. They are of something before, logically before materiality. They're of uncreatedness. Now, Occam's razor would slice off any source of these notions. How then could being, change, and ends of actual things ever connect? Why would we need consistency and change in line with some imaginary ends if we slice off their source? What would we do to ascribe being, as being precedes property, and thus itself is not a property at all, as Kant said? Why not unify these three notions together in a singular, uncreated ontology, rather than spin them off through the slicing of Occam's razor into three disparate directions that we can never connect? By the way, Occam, the creator of this razor, himself believed in God, if that's of any help. But one thing down these lines, induction, man, induction has to be the most challenging point that I have ever seen to the notion of bare contingency. In math, Kyle, as you know, induction is founded by grounding one particular case and then reaches the level of proof by abstracting to how an arbitrary element having a certain property entails that the following member will have that same property. But I mean, this is how Gauss proved that the sum of the first n integers was half the sum of the integer in its square. I mean, that's one of the most elementary proofs that can be used by mathematical induction. But this doesn't work in actuality. Induction in actuality isn't analytic. If you take Hume's criticism, Hume's criticism here is unanswerable, really, without being able to induct from particulars to a real, ontological, atemporal, formal, abstracted source to which these particulars are members. The whole reason Hume hits on this problem is because of Hume's famous dismissal of essences in the first place as something that we couldn't observe. Now, I propose that it is impossible to solve Hume's problem of induction without an uncreated reality governing the ends or forms, and forms maybe, of all things. And this uncreated logos is through whom all of these images, all of these real, actual things are made. This is one of my personal bases for accepting theism above atheism. Atheism doesn't have anything like that. There's just matter in motion, and it just happens to be consistent. And scientific philosophers, science-only philosophers, I should say, struggle with trying to solve Hume's basic induction principle. I don't think it can be solved, Kyle. And maybe you should consider my point as a valid solution to this. Now, one thing you may ask is, how would I know whether the uncreated is itself personal? Now, look at your alternative of facticality or bare contingency. How does one contingent set of reality, the one we experience, attain over some other contingent set of reality? Nothing that is in the actual universe dictates this, since even the contents of the actual universe have being. Their very being is contingent. And what moves these beings of things? What is the source of the being of things? Whatever it is, it's beyond the actuality of what exists. So, what determines that contingency? What moves the fact that something is rather than nothing actual is, rather than there's just plain old nothingness? There's no content of the universe whatsoever. What moves the state of all of this above nothing of this at all? There's only bare contingency. There's nothing left to move one state over the other. And that's why I think that there is a personal God standing behind this. And that's why I choose theism over atheism. So, about his essence, about God's essence being ineffable. Well, in a sense, all essences are ineffable. I would agree with Hume there and Nietzsche. But Instances of essences, like you or me, can be observed as their reflections lie within what is real. I observe the rational animal Kyle making your video. Your essence is contained perfectly as a subject of the sensations I received from your speech, your actions, your shape and size. But as I said before, God is not like us, unless he connects to reality as one who can communicate to us as Christ does. But all we can do with God is observe certain energies that we can recognize are themselves, in essence, uncreated, that stand beyond creation. And that is what I mean when I point to being, ends, and change as God, because these things are uncreated. Now, you mentioned the power of rationality. What about your bare material makeup? Does rationality even reflect? Is it something that we Homo sapiens learn and adapt from the consistency of being and motion towards ends that we evolved to survive in? Okay, fine. But that's conceding my position. So I guess one last comment to make. When I talk about form, I'm using it in a very open sense here. Form is contained within the logos, or the ends of all things. By form, I don't mean just shape, but that which, in part, gives shape. My hand is not this bottle. My hand can be certain shapes and forms, but it can't do other things. It can't become a bird's wings. So form, it does dictate shape, but it dictates so much more than that. So that's my reply to you, Kyle. Looking forward to a response, and looking forward to hanging out with you next week, buddy.